Welcome back everyone. Now in this video let's discuss about research gap. Already we have discussed what is research, what are the various research processes, how to define and identify the research problem, everything we have already discussed. And now today let's discuss what is a research gap. What is a research gap? The research gap is a research question or a problem which has not been answered or addressed properly by any of the existing studies within the field. So what is a research gap? Research gap is a research question or a problem. Actually, a question or a problem which has not been answered or addressed properly by any of the existing studies, that is research gap. So what is a research gap? Research gap is a research question or a problem which has not been answered or addressed properly by any of the existing studies within the field. Already we have so many articles related to our research, but even though we are searching those research articles, we won't get an answer for a question. So it is a research question or a problem which has not been answered or addressed properly by any of the existing studies. So we can also define it as a topic or area for which missing or insufficient information limit the ability to reach a conclusion for a question. We have a question, but because of the insufficient information or missing information, we are not able to come for a conclusion for a question. And also it is a gap that limits the ability of the decision maker from making conclusions. So we are not getting an answer, so what we are not able to do, we are not able to come to a decision, come to a conclusion. So what is a research gap? Research gap is a research question or problem which has not been answered or addressed properly by any of the existing studies within the field, and it is a topic or area for which missing or limiting information limit the ability to reach a conclusion, and because of that gap we are not able to make the decision. Hope you are clear about the definition. Next, finding the research gap is difficult. So the even researchers, academicians, they will be finding difficult to find the research gap in the literature in their respective field, and who are freshers, those who are doing the research in the preliminary stages, they won't be able to identify the research gap. And while making a research agenda, we should know a clear, we should identify the clear research gap. So most probably we can find out the gap statement in the introduction part of the journal article or poster, and in important section of the proposal we can see the research gap. Hope you're clear what is a research gap. Research gap is a research question or a problem which has not been addressed properly by any of the existing studies, and also it is a topic or area in which a missing or insufficient information limits the ability to reach to a conclusion. Okay, so identifying the research gap is very important, but it is difficult for academicians and also researchers when they are in the starting part of their research, that is in the preliminary stage of their research. And for making a research agenda, identifying the research gap is very important, and mainly we can see the research gap statement in the introduction of a journal article or poster. Okay, then how can you find out the research gap analysis? The process of research gap analysis involves 5 steps, that is identify the broad area, methods of identification, feasibility of research gap, selection of research gap, and expected outcome. So what are the various process by which you can identify the research gap? Identify the broad area, methods of identification, feasibility of research gap, selection of research gap, and expected outcome. First is the identification of the broad area. So the broad area of research is based on the area of our interest. So what is the broad area? The broad area of the research gap of the investigator is this broad area of his interest. So what we can do for identifying the research gap is he should read and analyze the various material from the literatures. He can search the various online databases, offline databases, then EBSC, Cohost, Emerald, Science Direct, Scopus, Web of Science. So all the sources he can search and he can read and analyze. Okay, he can collect the various information, he can read, analyze, and he can find out the broad area. So the broad area depend upon his area of interest. For this he should read and analyze the material from various literature, both online and offline databases. Next is identifying the research gap. Methods of identifying the research gap. So we have to formulate the questions. First he should find out the broad area of interest, then he should formulate the question that need further investigation and identify gap in the literature. So what's the second step? Second step is he should identify the formulate the question that need further investigation, and the selected questions may be obtained from books, catalogs, databases, and internets. The various methods for research gap analysis are citation analysis report, meta-analysis report, content analysis report, and systemic review. So what are the various methods by which we can identify the research gap? Citation analysis report, meta-analysis report, content analysis report, and systemic review. So let's see what is this citation analysis, meta-analysis, content analysis, and systemic review. So what is this citation analysis? Citation analysis is counting the number of times an article is cited by other works to measure the impact of a publication or author. So if you are publishing an article, how many times your article is made as a reference by other authors. So it is by counting the number of times an article is cited by other works to measure the impact of a publication or author. If your work is a very good one, it will be cited by so many authors, so many publishers, and it will be a good paper, good work. So citation analysis is the counting the number of times an article is cited by other works to measure the impact of publication or author. Second is the meta-analysis. In meta-analysis, it is a statistical analysis. It will be combining the results of multiple scientific studies. What is meta-analysis? It is a statistical analysis that combines the results of multiple scientific studies. And here we can do meta-analysis when they are 3 or more, when there are multiple scientific studies addressing the same question. So we have so many scientific studies which address the same question, but each study report measurement, they have some degree of error. So when you will be going for meta-analysis, we have so many scientific the same question, but individual study report measurements that have some degree of error. In meta-analysis, you are doing some statistical analysis that combine the result of multiple scientific studies, and when they'll be doing when there are multiple scientific studies addressing the same question, and each study report measurement that are expected to have some degree of error. Next is content analysis. In content analysis, we will be using some words, themes, concept within the given in the qualitative data. So in content analysis, we are using specific terms, words, or concepts, and in this we can quantify and analyze the concepts. Next is systemic review. In systemic review, it is a review of a clearly formulated question. In systemic review, we will be having a clearly formulated question. It will be using systematic and reproducible method. So what is systemic review? It is a review of a clearly formulated question, it will be using systematic and reproducible methods, and in this we will be collecting and analyzing the data that are included in the review. So in systematic review we are using review articles, and you are analyzing the various review. We are using some questions, and we are using some systematic and reproducible methods, and collect and analyze the data from studies that are included in the review. So what are the various methods by which we can identify the research gap? Citation analysis report, meta-analysis, content analysis, and systemic review. What is citation analysis? It is the number of times, counting the number of times an article is cited by others to measure the impact of a publication. Meta-analysis is a statistical analysis that combines the result of multiple scientific studies. When there is multiple scientific studies addressing the same question, but the individual study measurement expected to have some degree of error. In content analysis, we are using certain terms, words, themes, or concepts, and we will be analyzing and relationship. In systemic review is a review of clearly formulated question that uses systemic and formulated methods to identify, select, and appraise the question. Next, we know there is a gap between theory and practice, so we have to look into the problem in both theoretical and practical aspects. So we have to do both forward and backward referencing. Next is feasibility of the research gap. After finding the research gap, we should find out the feasibility of the problem. If the problem is not feasible, what we have to do? We have to change the topic. Okay, so we are finding the research gap. After finding the research gap in the research problem, you should see whether it is feasible to proceed with your work. For doing this, you can collect various primary data and secondary data, and also statistical tools available. And if you are not feasible with the research gap, you can change the topic. Next is selection of research gap. So the research gap selection depend on the relevance and importance of the field. Whether the field is so much important, what is the relevance of the work, why you selected the problem, your personal inclination, the availability of resources, research knowledge, and practicability. How we will be selecting the research gap depending upon the relevance and importance, criteria for selecting the research problem, personal inclination, research availability, research knowledge, and practicability. Next, the expected outcome. The researcher should identify the expected outcome from the research gap. Next, how to eliminate the research gap. First, we have studied how to find out the research gap. Next is how to eliminate the research gap. In various organizations, they use this Prcoess framework. Prcoess is population intervention comparison outcome settings. In organization, for eliminating the research gap, they are using the Prcoess framework, and it consists of two components. The first component is identifying and classifying the reason why the research gap exists. They have to identify and classify the reason why the research gap occurs. Then they will be going for the Prcoess analysis, that is population intervention comparison outcomes and settings. So first is finding out the reason why the research gap. So that may be insufficient or imprecise information. So we have to find out the reason. There may be imprecise or insufficient information, biased information, inconsistency or unknown consistency, and not the right information. We have to find out the reason, whether it is insufficient or imprecise information, biased information, inconsistency or unknown consistency, and if it is not the right information, then we can go for the framework, that is Prcoess framework. First is population. Population, we have to see whether the population category is mentioned, like gender, race, ethnicity, age. Next is intervention. Information whether recording specific intervention is included in the study. Specific intervention, what we need is included in the study should be seen. Next is comparison, whether there is lack of information regarding comparison intervention or standard intervention, whether the particular problem is compared with the standard intervention. Next is outcome. what is the outcome of interest, whether that expected outcome is lacking, the timing of outcome, everything should be seen. Next is the setting. What is the relevant setting for the research gap, that everything should be find out to eliminate the research gap. So what is research gap? Research gap is a problem which has not been addressed or answered properly by the previous studies, and because of the insufficient or missing information, we are not able to come to a conclusion. And research gap identification is very important, and initial researchers, preliminary researchers are not able to do that. And in mainly we can see it in the introductory part. It involves identifying the broad area based on your interest, method of identification like content analysis, systemic review, citation analysis, meta-analysis. Next is feasibility of the research gap, selection of the research gap and the expected outcome, and finally to eliminate the research gap we can find out the reason for the research gap, and also you can go for the Prcoess analysis. That is the what is this Prcoess analysis? The population, intervention, comparison, then outcome, and also settings. You can go for the Prcoess framework. What is this Prcoess framework? Population, intervention, comparison, outcome and settings. I hope everyone have understood what is research gap, how to identify research gap and how to eliminate the research gap. Thank you.